It's a monkey puzzle that has been felled and sliced. We're going to turn these into bowls. First stage is to try and get one face of this parallel to the main axis of the branches. That means that when we do eventually get the turned bowl, things look fairly even. Also, we need to get the piece as round as possible, and that means when we get it on the lathe, it's going to be more or less in balance. That means we can start turning at fairly reasonable speed. So the first thing to do is get up on a bench and then make a little gantry that we can use the router on, just to plane one side of it, one face of it, as I say, parallel to the main axis of the branches. Piece of wood is up on the bench now, a bit of brute force and ignorance to get up there, and I've marked around circle, as you can see. So this is where I'm going to get the chainsaw and just cut the thing to try and get it reasonably round. Unfortunately, this piece is too thick to go on the bandsaw, because if the bandsaw would be far easier to cut this round, but my bandsaw won't quite cope with this thickness, so it's going to be the chainsaw get it fairly round, and then once that is done, we'll get the router set up to get the top side flat. I've been fairly careful looking at this piece to see which is the best way to have round, which is going to be the top and the bottom. And I don't know if you can see, but just there, this is going to be the bottom side where the wood goes in quite a long way. So the bottom of the bowl is going to be sloping in quite steeply to miss out these bits, otherwise we get a very small diameter bowl. So, time to get the chainsaw, getting the face of this flat. So I built a little gantry that the router can just slide over, and the router bit will, as it goes along, will just plane the top such we get a nice flat top. Also, it's all been rounded as much as possible with the chainsaw, so when it goes on the lathe in a few minutes it will be hopefully fairly well in balance. So time to get going with the router. As you can see, plenty of sawdust and shavings from doing this, and the next stage is to screw the faceplate on. So the faceplate, you can see there's a little threaded bush there, that will go onto the headstock of the lathe in a minute, so that needs to get screwed on into the middle of this using some nice big screws. This piece of wood is fairly heavy, and obviously you don't want it flying off at some speed, because that could do just a wee bit of damage. So I say, next stage now is to screw this on, and then we'll put it up on the lathe. Screwed on. Next challenge is to get it down to the lathe and mounted. It's a little bit heavy to carry and lift, so I'm going to slide it down the ladder. Real Heath Robinson, which should be okay on this. Get it down on the jack, and then I can use the jack just to jack it up to the right level and screw the thing on. So ready to start turning. Moved all the jack and ladder away. Put the tool rest in place, and it's reasonably well balanced. You can see some of these big holes here where the branches have come out, so we're going to have to cut quite a long way down. So the first thing to do is get it round, balanced, and then on the bottom here I'll be turning a little recess that I can then put the chuck into. Let me just show you what the chuck looks like. So there you can see a chuck, and these black things, the jaws, they will expand and just fit in a hole in the bottom of the bowl to be. This is the gouge which I'll use, or the chisel. So this is a fairly big beefy thing. It was called a roughing gouge, just to get the thing round, and we'll turn the thing on and see how fast we can go before it gets out of balance. So 200 RPM, that doesn't look a bad speed, and needs to be careful not to stand in front of it just for when it does fly off. You don't want to be in the way of that should it come off. beginning to get the beginnings of a round shape. It takes a long time. Sometimes people ask, well, how long does it take to turn something? I reckon this is about half an hour's turning, and then we've had this morning with a chainsaw and planing of the thing off and get on the lathe and so on, another probably a couple of hours. So what we're going to get the wood and everything, we've probably got about 4 hours work so far in this piece. Anyway, get the lathe going again and get it a bit rounder. Okay, that's the hard part over. We've now got it round, and if you look down here you can see now the diameter's reduced somewhat. I can slide the headstock right back now and get this piece of wood right over the main bed of the lathe. That means that the tool rest, I'll take the extension out and it'll give me a lot more rigidity when I start a bit of serious turning now to get this down to the right size. Unfortunately, I am going to have to take quite a lot off the height of the bowl. Don't know if you can see, but there's a little crack in just there, so I'm probably going to have to take that much off the top. Otherwise we're going to have a horrible crack in it. Around the rest of it doesn't look too bad. There's a few cracks in some of the knots where the branches came out. I'll have to see what I'm going to do with that, because I'm going to cut down quite a long way down there. I've got to cut it down to get rid of the big notch just there. So we'll slide the headstock along and get set up to start shaping it. Round and starting to take shape, push the speed up a bit, up to 350 RPM. Not quite so heavy, but now it's not out of balance anymore. We can afford a somewhat higher speed, not very likely to fly off now. So this is where it gets a little bit quicker to take the stuff off as the shavings fly. So that's how it starts. You can start to see some of the knots coming out. It's going to be quite spectacular, this ball, I think. I haven't really finally decided upon the shape. The shape will really emerge as one begins to turn and just see how the pattern comes out. But I'm thinking it's going to be fairly shallow, and I'm going to lose quite a lot of height on this, I think. But we'll wait and see how it comes out. Shaping of the outside done. I've still got to do here. I'm going to turn this off and put a little recess in for the chuck, and I think it's going to be quite a nice bowl, this. The knots, these teardrop shapes on the outside, and they'll be corresponding on the inside. They'll be going more or less into the centre of the piece, so it should be quite a nice bowl, this when it's finished. And as I was saying earlier, I think I'm going to take the height down to probably about just there, something like that. So that's going to be quite a shallow bowl, and it's going to look good. Right, we've finished shaping the underneath, and as you can see just there, we've got this little recess that the chuck is going to clamp into. So the next thing will be to take it off, unscrew the faceplate, and fit it on the chuck and start to shape the top of it. It is, I think, quite a nice shape, this one. So looking forward to seeing how this is going to come out. So So when you start to hollow it down to probably about 3/4 of an inch thick wall thickness, and then I'll leave it to dry for several months, and then when it's dry put it back on the lathe, and it'll probably distort very, very slightly. This wood is fairly stable as it dries, and then just true it up and sand it down and polish it. Monkey puzzle is horrible stuff to turn though, because this bit here is just very, very soft, very coarse, complex grain, so it doesn't cut evenly, and then the knots, they're very, very hard, so it tends to get quite a lot of chatter and it doesn't cut very cleanly, so ends up with unfortunately having to do a lot of sanding to get a decent finish on it. But when it's done, it is certainly very, very pretty stuff. We're now mounted the other way round, securely clamped with a chuck, and then I've got the tailstock in as well. Initially when one's turning this, one can get a lot of vibration and so on, so the tailstock just taken to help just dampen things down a bit and make it a bit more secure. If one does get a nasty catch without the tailstock, the piece would probably fly off. It's reduced in weight now, I can easily pick it up, but it's still not something you want to see flying off. So, need to get going with turning now. That's finished roughing this one out now. So next stage is just to leave it to dry off for a few months and then put it back on the lathe and finish it off. It's not a bad pattern at all, this. Quite pleased with it. Yeah, should make a nice bowl when it's finished.